Hey folks, thanks so much for joining me here. In this session, we're going to be looking at the amazing new features in Trapcode Particular, specifically the ones where they've taken elements of Trapcode form and brought them into Trapcode Particular, because this really opens up a whole new can of worms. So we're going to be making this project here. And here we have this little star thing, this little trophy, because you're all winners for showing up today. It's not easy to just exist currently, so this is a trophy for all of you. But if you look at what's all going on here, there's particles, and there's like this little meteor comet thing that's going around with some smoke, and there's like this kind of 3D trail. It's got this kind of cool 3D scene. The fun part about this, though, is this is all happening on one instance of Particular. If I go to the composition where this exists and click on the actual layer here, you could see that if we were to go and turn off this Particular, there's nothing there anymore. I mean, it's all happening on this one instance of Particular. So again, we have all of these systems that can now talk to each other and integrate, and you can create these really big scenes, as we'll see here. Now, I don't recommend that you would, create super elaborate three-dimensional scenes all the time with Particular. I mean, that's what Cinema 4D is for, right? I mean, that's the purpose of a 3D program, is to create 3D worlds. But the point is that you can do things like that. And sometimes when you're creating particles, but either form particles or particular particles, or now both, you want those to integrate in a more whole and complete way, which now we can do. So we're going to start out by looking at how to create three-dimensional objects. Also, let me clarify a little bit. I was not totally honest. So I said that whole scene was Particular, but there's actually these little glows. I took these solid layers and blurred them. It's a small thing, but I feel just to come completely clean and be totally upfront, there were these glowing blobs beneath the Particular layer. So now that I got that off my chest, let's talk about making 3D objects like these here, like this three-dimensional star and this base and stuff like that. These are actual 3D objects made out of particles in Particular. So let's look at how to do that. I'm in Particular, and I just I went ahead and applied Particular. That's all I've done here. And I just have this one basic system. And I'm going to change the emitter type from point to 3D model. Next, I'm going to go ahead and click on Choose Model to open the model browser. And here we'll see the first of several new features of the day. There has previously been a geometry category in this section here, and then also some extra models down here at the bottom. Also, if you have any custom objects that you've imported on your own through the Add New Model button here, they'll show up in a custom section at the bottom. But we've pretty much just had those sections, and now we have this new Cinema 4D area, which adds a bunch of new 3D objects that you can use as you'd like. And the cool thing, again, about using Cinema 4D files natively instead of OBJs is that you can take in animation from Cinema 4D, so these become much more powerful, which I love. Now, the one I actually want to use, I'm going to close up the C4D section. The one I actually want to use is in the geometry section. So I'm going to scroll down to the S's, and I want to get the star. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the star in the geometry section and click OK to bring that in. Now, I'm going to turn off the velocity, just take velocity down to 0, and we can see this a little bit more clearly here, that we just have an array of particular particles in the shape of a star, because essentially this star becomes a particle emitter shooting out particles. But it's a little bit different now because we have form built into Particular. So under emitter behavior, instead of choosing continuous, I can change this to, let's say, classic form. So now these particles are going to behave as they do in form instead of Particular. Now, if you're not familiar with Trapcode form, it's a little bit different and unusual and quirky, but it opens up so many doors. So as we know with particles systems, they are born and they live a life, and then they die out. Just like little human beings. They're born, they live, and they die out. But the thing with form particles are less like, people in that way, and they're more like more like Paul Rudd, where they just kind of exist, indefinitely. Where you could go back to like form particles in a movie in 1990 and they still look exactly the same. So like Paul Rudd, form particles just kind of exist. They are not born, they don't live and then die, they just exist indefinitely. And so things are a little bit different. We don't have particles per second because the form particles are just there. So now things change a little bit for us. And I'm going to open up the distribution section, for example, and we could put these particles on a grid if we want to. And also, I could come down here to the model emitter now and fiddle with the settings here. Now, by default, this is emitting from the edges. And because this is like a weird shape with a star, there's kind of like this weird end on. So then there's these kind of like, divisions over here, and this doesn't look great. This is kind of visually distracting. So instead of emitting from the edges, I want to treat this 3D object like a volume and fill it with particles. So I'll take the emit from to volume, and then they fill more evenly. Now to get even more evenness in my object here, I can open up the distribution section, put this on a grid, and that creates like a grid of particles here. And I'm going to go ahead and take now this particle density property shows up. So I'm going to take this down to 30% so we don't have as much density in the way of our particles. And now we have this object here, this like star. Take the size down just a little bit. And I could go ahead and now create a camera very quickly. And if I just kind of orbit around this, you'll see that we have an actual three-dimensional star made out of particles, which is really cool. There's a lot of really great uses for this, including making a trophy for people who are living and making it in the world today. So if I skim through the timeline here, you can see that there's nothing that happens. These particles do not live, they don't die, they don't evolve or change. They are, by default, form particles where they just exist. Now, I'm going to delete my camera here and go back to particular, fiddle with this a little bit more. I think I'm all done with this emitter section here, and close that up and open up the particle section so we could fiddle with that here. I'm gonna take the particle size down to like 1, maybe give this some randomness so all of those little spheres aren't the same size. Let me zoom in here so we can see a little bit more clearly what's going on. And I also think I might give some randomness to the opacity as well. So we just kind of have just a little bit more of like a neon-ish feel going on. Now, form particles really start to come alive when you change the color and the blend mode. So I'm going to select the color swatch, and I'm going to go to kind of like this like weird brown color. Stay with me, and that's not great, but stay with me here. I'm going to click OK here, and now if I go to the blend mode and change this to add, well, then this starts to come alive a little bit. We see a little bit more magic here in this star. And maybe I could brighten this up. And this isn't a beauty contest. I don't have to make this look perfect to get the point across of the 3D objects, but that's a little prettier to look at for now. Okay, so now what I want to do is make this a little bit more rich and complex. So to do that, I'm going to open up the Show Systems area, and I'm going to go ahead and add a new system. But contrary to the warm invitation from this button, inviting me to add a system, I don't want to actually click this button to do that, because if I click this button here, it's going to add a new system with the default particular settings. And I actually want to duplicate this system. So what I'm going to do is click on the word designer to launch the designer. Now we get a warning that you just saw there, warning us about the classic form, and I'll explain what that is all about momentarily. But for now, I'm going to go down to the flyout menu for the primary system, and I'm going to choose Duplicate System. Now, if you've been using Particular for a while, you've probably been playing around with these multiple system things. It's very amazing. You get a lot of powerful features from being able to create a lot of different systems. The only thing is that it's really hard to tell them apart. If you have like something on like System 7, and then you have something else on System 10, 10 or something. It's like, what's going on? Where's my stuff? So now what you can do in this version, this is like a totally undersold new feature, but so great. So I can go to this flyout and I can click rename system. Only when you're in the designer. It doesn't work in the regular After Effects UI, but here I can go to the flyout menu, click rename system, get a little pop-up window, and I'm just going to call this main star, and I'm going to put it in all caps so that the world knows I mean business. And then I'm going to change the label color, which is also fantastic. So this is kind of like a golden color, so I can go ahead and click this orange. It's kind of like golden color, and give that the label for this system. And then over here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to just rename this to star front and click OK. And then I will name or color this orange again as well. And now, because my label colors match the content on it, I can easily select visually what layers on what, and also these handy names. Now, on this duplicate, I'm going to fiddle with things a little bit, and I'll do that here in the designer. So I can click on these different blocks, which represent the different kind of components of our particle system here. And this is the same controls and stuff that we find in the After Effects UI and the Effect Controls panel. But the thing is that this is organized so much more clearly. We have these blocks. They're so much easier to see and select visually. They also have these really great thumbnails, which are dynamic and tell you what's going on with a particular property. It's just fantastic. So I'm going to select emitter type here, and I'm going to take the emitter size down a little bit more. Maybe to like 300. I reserve the right to take this down even more later or take it up, but for right now, we'll just do that. So you can see now that we have kind of like this inset star effect. And again, keep in mind, these are three-dimensional objects. Now on my main version, I adjusted the relative position on the z-axis of this star to bring it out in front. I'm not going to take the time to do that now, but I can go over to the particle density here, scroll down a little bit, and I'm going to increase this to 45%, and maybe we'll go to the size rotation block, increase the size to 2. I'm just going to add some variation here so that we have a little bit different stuff going on here. So you could kind of have a little bit more variation and a little bit better design, I think. Now, I'm going to duplicate this star front object again. Well, not again. We duplicated the other one first. I'm just going to duplicate this one, and I'm going to rename this, which I can do now because it's amazing. And I'm going to call this Teardrop Base. And give it, again, that orange color. And now I'm going to go back to the emitter type block, and I'm going to change my 3D model here. So let's scroll down, and I'm going to click on the Choose Model button. And instead of the star that we had before, I'm actually going to use this teardrop. Go ahead and click OK on that. And now we have these particles arranged in the shape of a three-dimensional teardrop. So then what I could do is increase the Y value of this to drop this on the y-axis until this is like a base for my stars. Now I'm going to go ahead and cancel that out, and I'm going to go to the final version of this comp, making these 3D objects. And then you can see a little bit more clearly like what's going on here. So we have this three-dimensional teardrop shape, and then there's like a 3D hemisphere that's again one of the stock models that comes with Particular. There's also this like tube shape. And so what I did was I just kind of like stacked these to make this like little trophy looking thing. By now you might be asking like, okay, this is cool, but like there's no life to this. And the magic of a particle system is that, you know, there's just like stuff shooting out everywhere, and there's just energy to it. And then if the particles are just kind of like with form, they're just kind of like here, well then like, aren't we losing some of the magic? Well, let's talk about how to get some of that magic back by putting motion into this in a few different ways. So here I have this adding motion composition where we have our good old buddy, the star, isolated. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some motion to this. Now, in my case here, this 3D object is in a duplicate system. It's not on like the parent main original OG system. It's on a new one. So it doesn't always have all of the properties of the main or previous system. And trust me, that is a benefit, a huge benefit, because when you have, 13, 14, 15 systems, you don't want to have to scroll through every property that you're not using on these duplicate systems. So what I want to do is I want to open up the designer, click on the designer button, and get back to the designer here. And then what I want to do is I want to add some of this motion here. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that this is selected on the left in our systems area, and then go over to displace and click on the middle little plus icon here to add a block. And for now, we're just going to add the default field. And by doing so, even though it's like this blank thing and nothing's really happened, there's nothing changed, it still allows us to fiddle with this later. So we can change this here, which is actually a faster way to do it. We'll look at that a little bit later, because we're going to get a live preview as we fiddle with that. But also, when I click apply here and come back to the After Effects UI, the After Effects UI is updated, and now we have those properties here in the Effect Controls panel that we can fiddle with that we didn't have before. So essentially what this allows you to do now in Trapcode Particular is it uses the turbulence field from form to fiddle with particles. And typically we use that fractal field in one of three ways: to affect the size, opacity, or to displace them. Essentially what this does is it takes a black and white fractal noise map that's operating behind the scenes, and it uses that to fiddle with the particles in one of those three ways, either with size, opacity, or displacement. So that fractal field pattern can make it so that where the dark part of the fractal noise pattern is, it affects the size one way, and then where the bright parts of the noise are, it affects the size the other way. And so then you could have variation in the size of the particles based on where that turbulence field is. And this is much easier to see than explain. Or maybe it's not. Maybe I just explained that really poorly. I'm going to say that it's just so hard, but it'll make sense when we see it. So like if I go over here to like the size, for example, and I increase this value, it's basically saying how much do you want that invisible fractal field to influence the size of your particles. So maybe I'll take this to like 10 or something. Whoa, yeah, so a little dab will do ya when it comes to size. You can see we have a really big effect here. Maybe we could take that down to even just like a 2 or something like that. It's probably pretty good. Yeah, just a little bit there. But you can see where that fractal pattern, the invisible behind the scenes fractal pattern, is making its mark by adjusting the size of the particles. So these particles are smaller, these particles are bigger. But it does something different. Anytime you take any one of these properties to a non-zero number, it initiates the animation here, because the evolution speed by default is set to 50. So even though I just did affect size, if I preview this, you can see that, and I can take a little bit of time here, but this fractal noise pattern is automatically animating here. So if I scrub this back here, you can see that this is moving. And in this way, we can bring a lot of life and motion into our particles. This is very, very exciting. I spend a lot of my time here in the turbulence field area. Again, we can, affect the opacity in a similar way. And also I'm going to undo that here, take that back to 0. And also a thing that I use is you could take the displacement in the same way. And so it's basically displacing the particles based on that invisible fractal noise map. And again, that's an interesting looking shape. And it's 3D. You can see the 3D-ness a little bit on the edges there, which is pretty cool. And if I preview this, we can see that this is automatically animating. That's all you have to do to bring life to the particles with this turbulence field, is just change any one of those three things, size, opacity, or displacement, to a non-zero number. And then here we have this like really cool like warbly starfish. That looks pretty cool. Now, because I use this all the time, I often go into the turbulence field controls. This is almost like the granular settings in fractal noise, where you could really fine tune and tweak the fractal noise map. But instead of things here like contrast or whatever, there's like interesting things like, the octave multiplier, and things are a little bit different here. But the scale value essentially does a similar thing to what scale value does in fractal noise, where you adjust the size of the map. But here it's like the opposite. So if I want more fine detail here, which I do, I'm going to take the TF scale up to 60. So instead of having these big warbly things, we're going to have a smaller noisy thing. Now I'm going to take the displace down to 0. I actually don't want to displace this, and I actually don't even want to affect the size that much. Well, maybe just a little bit, it's okay. And then I also want to affect the opacity like 3, just a little bit. And that creates this kind of like, I don't know, Vegas-y, like little flashing light thing, because we turned up the scale and we have just a little bit of size and opacity. It's like we have just like a little bit of sparkles. It's almost like this, like our stars made out of like, I don't know, neon sequins or something. Now I also might want to go back to my evolution speed here, which is almost like the evolution property in fractal noise, right? Except it's automatically animated, which is so nice. And I could take this up to like 80 if I want these to really kind of twinkle more, and I do. Or I could slow this down. If I want to just like barely evolve over time and just go like really slowly undulate, I might take that way down. But anyways, this is really cool. Now let's go ahead and do something different. I'm going to create that grid background here, and we'll learn a little bit more of what's going on here. I'm going to click on Add a System this time, so I'm going to just start from scratch, and we're going to go ahead and click on this, and I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to call this, I don't know, back wall. I don't know why I'm so unsure about that. It's not rocket science. I'm going to go ahead and change the label to purple here. And I'm going to go ahead and pause the playback because it distracts my poor little easily distractible brain. And I want to show you another way to use this new form functionality here. So in the trophy, we arranged particles into a 3D object shape. But now we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to create like a grid. So this is what makes form a really great tool for creating user interface elements. I'm going to change the emitter type to box, and then I'm going to change the emitter behavior to classic form. Again, I haven't explained this dynamic form business, but I will in a minute when we look at how to create smoke. So I'm going to click classic form, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to arrange these particles on a grid in the distribution section. I don't want any particles in Z, just XY particles. And what I want is 24 particles in X. I want 8 particles in Y to make this XY grid, but this is not spread out the way I want. I could go to the emitter size, but because they're linked by default, it just scales up as a square. I want more of a rectangle that covers the width of the comp, but not the height. So I'm going to change the emitter size to XYZ linked, or from XYZ linked to XYZ individual. And now I'm going to, let's see, I'm looking at my notes here behind the scenes. While you're looking at my screen, I'm cheating. So I want a 3,000 pixel wide thing, and then I want 800 pixels tall there, and wide doesn't matter because we only have those particles. So now we have this like cool grid in the background. And keep in mind that with the turbulent field, we could instantly go in here and with just like the fiddling of one of those 3 buttons, size, opacity, or displacement, we could give life to this background. I'm not going to do that just yet. Let's go ahead and fiddle with this some more. I'm going to go over to particle type, the block particle type. And I'm going to change the particle type from sphere, or any one of these built-in things, to sprite. This allows me to use a custom particle for my sprite. And if you have a background in particular but not form, these sprites take on a totally different vibe and feel. When they can just exist somewhere, those weird shapes that maybe weren't super useful with particular can be really beneficial with form. So I'm going to click on Choose Sprite, and that launches my little browser here with this vast array of cool shapes that ship with particular. And so I'm going to go into the 2D shapes area, and I'm going to look for a sprite. I think I'm going to use this locator too. That's what I use in my example thing, and I don't know, I'm feeling like playing it close to the vest. So there we have that. And these particles are pretty tiny by default, so I might need to go in here to the size rotation block, click on that, and maybe bring up the size a little bit more there. And maybe add a little bit of randomness to the size, a little variation there. Then I'm going to change the color. I'm going to click on the color block, click on the color swatch, and let's get, oh, this is a Windows color picker. I am really not into this color picker at all, the Windows color picker. Doesn't do it for me. Now, as I change the color, you might be like, hey, what's the deal, bub? There's no color change at all. Well, we got to change another setting here. I'm going to go back to my size rotation, or excuse me, my particle type here. And on the particle type block, you'll see these two different values, colorize and color fill. You used to find options like this in this drop down, but then this drop down kind of get a little unwieldy with all those choices. So now you could just affect all that stuff here. You could choose these sprites to face the camera always, which we do. We're going to enable that. We could also colorize and color fill. The difference is not going to be visible here, but colorize tints the existing thing. Color fill just completely fills the whole shape with a color. So I'm going to increase colorize, and as I do, take it all the way to 100, you'll see that we are now dyeing our particles, this custom sprite, dyeing it this color. And again, we could go over here to the displace area, click the plus icon. Let's go ahead and add the default, but we'll fiddle with it here. I'll close up the blocks area, or click on the block to adjust it here. And then I could just add a little bit of effect size, a little bit of effect opacity. And now if I play that here in the designer, we could see the star sparkling, and we could see the size of these changing a little bit, the opacity kind of going through these background elements. Again, a very quick way to add randomness and complexity to a lot of objects at once. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel to cancel out of this. And I'm going to go over to the final version of the adding motion comp here, just to give you a taste of what I was going for. So another thing that I did was I added a floor here that consists of like these little plus sprites, and then these little square sprites alternating on that grid. And then I also added these little like green targets that are affected by the fractal field. And there's also little kind of Trapcode Particular like particles spitting out. They're in the master comp, I guess. They're not in this one. But there's so much life in motion. Look at this. Look how fun that is. I won't take time to render this because it's starting to slow my system down with all this turbulent field business. But, you know, this is really, really lovely. A lot of energy there. Good time. Ooh, let me show you something else. This is really cool. So if you're used to Trapcode Particular, you know, one of the things that you are not accustomed to is looping. You can't really loop a particle system. If you have particles shooting out everywhere, they can't like go back to where they were at the beginning of the simulation. They kind of just go out and then do their thing. But when you have form particles that are affected by a fractal field, which can loop, then it's very easy to loop these particles. Now, again, that doesn't mean that everything in particular is going to be loopable seamlessly. And it doesn't even mean that when you're using form particles in particular that everything's going to loop seamlessly. But it does mean that when you're using the fractal field to make changes, that can loop, and it's very, very easy to do. So if I look here at my making loops composition here, and we have this thing going around, you know, we got a bunch of action going on there. I'm going to select the making loops layer so we can see our particular stuff. Now I'm going to go to my little green thing here. That's where the targets are. And I know that because of the color coding and the labels, which I can add now, which is so amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and solo this green system, which is, again, these little targets. And as I preview this, you know, the fractal field displaces these, and the fractal field is adjusting their opacity as well. So they kind of like come and go and blink and, you know, move in and out and whatnot. And in that way, it's kind of cool because we can simulate particular. We could simulate particles kind of like emitting because the fractal field can make them go out and then disappear. So they're not really like born and then die. They're still there, but the fractal field can kind of make them undulate and move around. So it kind of simulates like a particle thing. But again, as you see here, as we preview this, this is not a loop. This is not a seamless loop. So watch when it gets to the end, it's going to leap. Boom, it just jumps. So here's the last frame. And here's the first frame. Last, first. They do not match at all. So what I can do here with my, make sure this system is selected, I go down to the displace area, which is where the turbulent field exists. Open up the turbulent field section. And then right here at the bottom, there's just a flow loop section, a flow loop option, I mean. So I enable flow loop. That's not all you have to do. You don't just do that. But then you have to just tell it in seconds how long your composition is. My composition is 4 seconds long. So I'm going to change the loop time to 4. Now, I'm going to go ahead and load this into RAM. This is not going to take too long, just a few seconds. And then watch it play back. Here it goes. It's going to loop. It's going to loop. It's going to loop. Boom. Seamless. Look at that. Look at that. So the last frame in this case now and the first frame. Look at that. Last. First. It's the same frame. It's the same frame. It's a seamless loop. It's that easy. The thing is that one thing, it is the same frame. So you are going to have a one frame duplicate of that thing, because that's just kind of how like looping works. So if you need to, there are expressions you can find online that make that a little bit, one frame shorter, or you can also just make the work area or the composition one frame shorter or whatever you need. But that's how to create a seamless loop. Now, let's get to the fun stuff, folks. We're going to learn how to make some stylized smoke and fire using these new features in Particular. We're going to be creating this little fire here with form, and then be creating some smoke with the native features in Particular. And I say form in Particular, it's really just all Particular, but I'm referring to form particles in Particular. You know what I mean? Okay, so here's Particular. I'm going to open up the emitter section. And again, we're going to be creating this fire. So I'm going to change the emitter type to a sphere. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the emitter to classic form. Now, keeping the emitter size even for XYZ is not going to work in this case. So I'm going to change this to XYZ individual. So I can then change the size here to 150. And then 450 and 150. So we have kind of like an ovalish thing. I'm not sure what a pill? Yeah, a pill size shape. Yeah, we'll call it that. Now, I need to order these particles, so I'm going to open up distribution, put these on a grid by enabling this option. So we have this kind of like, this like capsule effect. And I want only one sphere layer, but I'm going to need a lot of particles here to make this work. So I'm going to change the particles in X to 250 and the particles in Y to 350. And we're going to have a heck of a lot of particles to deal with here. This is, probably going to slow things down a bit because it is 250 times 350 particles, whatever that math equals out to. And I'm going to go now to the particle section, and I'm going to take down the size to 2.5. Note again that because form particles just exist, we don't have to deal with life when we are using form, or we can't deal with life. They just exist. So, okay, that looks pretty decent. Let's take the opacity down to 70%. It's still not getting anywhere. Just bear with me here for just another second, folks. I want to go ahead and change the color. I'm going to set the color, instead of at start, I'm going to change this to over Y. I'm going to have a gradient go over the particles over the Y axis. And this begins a little conversation we're about to have here and there as we're making this fire about these curves. And you've seen those curves in Particular, you've seen them in form. If you're not used to them from form, they do different things and can be a little confusing. So we're going to clear that up just a little bit in one moment. First of all, just know that this color is over Y, and I'm going to open up the color gradient, and I'm going to create kind of like I don't know, it's not going to be pretty. I'm going to create black on this first color, and then I'm going to create this kind of like really muddy red, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the add blend mode. So when you add things together, especially a lot of particles like this that's really dense, you're going to get over bright stuff all over the place, and it's going to look like garbage. So you kind of have to know ahead of time what you're going for, and then make things like excessively muddy and dark and desaturated to compensate before you even get there. So let's see how this looks. Honestly, I never know, folks. I never know what this is going to look like. So I'm going to change the blend mode to add. How did that come across? It's all right. We're going to fiddle with this more later. I'm not super happy with that, but whatever. Let's just move on for right now. Okay, so I'm going to open up the displace area, open up Turbulence field, and this is where the magic happens. I want to displace these particles, so I'm going to change the displace value to a whopping 140. And this is probably going to take a second to render because that's a lot of displacement and a lot of particles. Look how gorgeous that is. Doesn't look like fire yet, but I mean, it looks like something gorgeous. It's pretty. I love it. Now I'm going to open up the Turbulence field controls. I'm going to take the scale up to 10, which again shrinks that fractal scale so that it's a little bit more fine detailed. Now, I alluded to the curve drawing interface a little bit earlier and how they're different, and now we get to see how this works. I'm going to change the fractal strength over. You'll see this a lot in form and now in particular as well. So you see fractal strength over, and it says off. So what this allows me to do is to remap where the fractal field, where the turbulence field affects the system. So I want to control how it adjusts this over or affects this over the y-axis. I don't want all of the whole thing on the y-axis to have the turbulent field messing with it, only part of it. So once you enable the over dimension, then the curve is selectable and editable here. And so again, if you're working with Particular, these graphs have existed, but they map how that property affects the particle over time, over the life of the particle. But with form, since those particles just exist, it affects how that property affects the form over the whole object on a given dimension. So, for example, the left side here controls the top of the object. The right side controls the bottom of the object. Even though it says start, time, and end, that's just kind of like how Particular does things, but that's not really what it's doing. So the left side affects the top, the right side affects the bottom. So essentially what I want to do is something a little bit more intelligent than this, but let's just start with this preset graph that slopes down. So the fractal field affects it a lot, all the way at the top, and then it affects it less as it goes down. And now we're starting to see the beginnings of like a fiery shape, because this is our pill shape because it doesn't have the fractal field affecting it. And as it goes up, it's starting to. Now, if we preview this, which is, this is going to be bad news because this is going to take a long time since it's a lot of particles. We do have some kind of like organic motion with the turbulence field, but when you have a fractal field that evolves, it just kind of like stays there and does its thing, where it's at. But we want this to go up. So what we can do is go back to these turbulent field controls and go to flow Y. And I'm actually going to take this into a negative value, so this flows up. I'll take it to about negative 30, and negative 37 is fine. But now when I preview this animation here a little bit, what we're seeing is that the fractal field is being animated because of the evolution speed, but it's also flowing upwards, which is really cool. So we're starting to have some kind of like fiery motion to this, which is awesome. That color palette now has officially worn out its welcome. And so I'm going to add a little bit more red towards the bottom. I'm going to add a little bit more orange and darkness towards the bottom area there. And maybe that will make it more palatable for me. Okay, that's a little better, I guess. Now, the top of this thing is absolutely horrific. So what we can do is go back to these over graphs and fiddle with those. So again, the opacity is affecting all of this, the whole form. the same. And we don't want it to do that. We want to affect the opacity over also the y-axis. So again, we have this opacity curve here, and I'm going to use, let's try this one, and then I'm going to flip it by clicking this little button here. So you could see what that does. So if I turn this off, you can see that the whole thing is just as opaque as all the rest of the thing. But when I take this to the y-axis and I say affect this opacity curve over the y-axis, you can see that again, the top of this object is represented over here where there's no opacity, and then it fades in about halfway through and it's fully opaque at the bottom. That's exactly what we're seeing here. If I want to add a little bit more to this, I can do the size over and do the size over y as well, open up the size curve, and then do, I don't know, something similar, I guess. I'll select this and then flip it. So that way this is going to make it so that the size at the top is tiny and then at the bottom it's like the normal size. And that should cut out a little bit more. Now I could go in here and draw a little bit more of this if I want to bring back some of these details, but that's fine for now. And that's pretty much it. That's the fire. We could fiddle with this a little bit more. Obviously the color palette, you know, it's not fantastic. I might take the opacity down a little bit, and maybe that's too much. I took it from 70 to 30. That's probably bad news there. But yeah, see, now we have a different look. And again, this is not, you know, completely true to life fire where it actually looks like a flame. But for something stylized, this is really cool. It's quick and easy, and it's flexible. You don't have to simulate it in this case. It's just, you know, very quick and easy, especially if you're doing something like a torch in the background or something like that. Or if you're going to have a hero element like my little meteor, and it's kind of like a fun, obviously stylized composition, then this works as well. But what is fire without smoke? Let's look at how to make some smoke here. And again, we're going to be starting from scratch with just a basic default application of Particular. I'm going to go into emitter here, and I'm going to change the emitter type to a 3D model. I know we have like a sphere here, but for some reason, choosing a sphere in the 3D model, I don't know, I feel like I have a little bit more control that way sometimes. So I'm going to go ahead and just load up. I guess I already, you know, spoiled it. But yeah, I'm going to click on the sphere here and load up that sphere 3D object. But in this case, we're going to leave this set to particular. We're going to use some traditional particular features. And you know, the general thing when making smoke for me is usually what I'm trying to do is make big particles that are very low opacity. And yeah, we'll see that in just a second. I'm going to take particles per second up to 400. I'm going to take down the emitter size to 150 so we can see what we're doing here a little bit easier. Maybe I'll zoom out to like half size as well. Now, as this is moving here, it's going outwards, and I don't want that. I want it to be directional. So I'm going to change this to directional, and I'm going to change X rotation to 90 degrees. And now it's moving upwards. Okay, so we got that going for us. I'll open up the model emitter. It's emitting from the edges. That's good. I want that. Velocity is a little bit too strong. I'm going to take that down to 60. And again, we're starting to have some motion that's generally like smoke. We're still actually pretty far off, but that's gonna change. It's gonna, believe you me, that's gonna change. I'm gonna open up the particle section, take down the life to 2 seconds because this is again being emitted from a moving, spinning thingy. So I don't want there to be like a huge smoke trail. So I'm cutting that short at 2 seconds there. Maybe get a little bit of randomness, 50% randomness with the life. And again, I'm going to crank this up. Size 40 and opacity down to 30. Now, what I did for the color was I did a random from gradient. For the sake of time, I'm just going to take this color to kind of like a darker gray and then maybe give it like a 5% color. That's going to be too much. That's going to be too much. 5% color random. That's fine. We'd get more life out of this if it was like a gradient, but I want to move on because I'm excited to show you another thing here. I'm going to, actually, let me make this a little bit darker temporarily. Okay. Now, I want to go and close up the particle section. And in the physics simulations, we have bounce, meander, flocking, and fluid. These are actual real simulations that run on the motion of particles. And so what I want to do here is open up fluid, enable fluid motion. And what that's going to do, it's not going to really change the particles themselves. It's going to change how they move. So this is not creating fluids per se, but this is taking your particles and moving them in a very fluid-like way, a very accurately fluid way. So as I play this back now, instead of having these particles that just kind of like move straight up, you can see that they're starting to kind of swirl around a little bit. They're kind of moving around. They're having forces act on them. So again, this is a real actual simulation. So just like if you're working in, X particles, or if you're working in like, Houdini or something like that on a real actual simulation, if you're going to simulate it, then you got to go back to the first frame and start all over again. Now, this is another one of those things that's actually easier to do in the designer, because if I click on the designer and the designer launches, we'll see that we actually have, if we select the simulations block here, that we have this block here that gives us a sense of what's actually happening. We have the container that our fluid simulation is happening in, and also this direction. And because we have buoyancy, this arrow is letting us know that the buoyancy is pushing our particles upwards. I'm just going to go ahead and pause that for a second. Now I take buoyancy down to 4. I don't want that to rise as intensely. And again, I want to hit the this first frame button to jump back to the first frame to resimulate after making changes here. Now, we're not going to use the swirl here, but if we did take random swirl up to like 10 and, swirl scale by default is set to 10, we do kind of start to get these like really cool swirly, tornado-y effects, which are great for smoke. Well, great for other smoke, not the smoke that we're trying to do. So this is fine for us right now, but be aware that that's there. Now, another thing that I want to do is I want to affect these particles, not just with buoyancy, not just with the direction of the emitter, but I also want another force to kind of like push these particles up. And so what I could do to get that is go into the displace area, click on motion effects. Let's go over to our blocks. Let's go ahead and just, so for right now, we'll just load up the default motion block here. And then what I want to do is take down the drift to -20. So this is almost like what the old wind effect used to be in Particular, where it just kind of like moves the particles along in kind of like not the most intelligent way. But when you have this perfect fluid simulation, it's great to be able to have another force kind of like act on it and move those particles along. It's very cool. So go back to the first frame, simulate this, and now we have this cool kind of like organic motion to our particles. Now, this color is actually driving me crazy. I can't deal with it anymore. It's like this like muddy rainbow sherbet. So when I click on color, and when you're in the designer, the color blocks the options that you get. There's just a lot more going on. I'm not going to be able to find like a perfect like smoke color, but what I can do is click something like Brooklyn that has like a limited palette, and then I could just kind of like, fiddle with this and just kind of desaturate it all. So it's, kind of set up for me-ish. So they have different like brightness values, and then that works there. And also take down color random to 0. Yuck. So now if I back this up and play this, we can see that we have some like cool motion. You could see inside of that smoke that's kind of like twisting and turning. And that's what makes this worth that extra processing time, because it's so lovely and feels so realistic. Now, one of the things I don't like about this is that these particles are popping on and off. So we're getting a lot of like unnecessary jitter. So what we want to do is go over here to like opacity, and then, we could fiddle with this over life. We could just draw like a little curve, like so it fades in and out there. And then maybe for like scale, size, rotation, we draw in a curve here. We start big-ish and then just kind of gets a little big over time there. Yeah, like something like that. Now let's simulate it again. And there we go. Yeah, we got a few of these things kind of popping on there like that. So I might need to go back to opacity and just kind of trim this like that. So we have a more gradual thing. Maybe click the smooth button a few times and then play that back here. Yeah, there we go. Now it's starting to feel a little bit more like organic smoke. Very, very cool. Go ahead and click apply here. Now, I mentioned that fluid and drift can be used together, which is really cool. But you can't use fluids with the other physics simulations. And that's what this whole, oops, I went in the wrong spot there. That's what this whole classic form versus dynamic form means. So if you're going to apply a simulation to form, then you're going to want to use dynamic form. If you're just going to use like the turbulent field and other features, then use the classic form. So that's the difference there. Now let me just share one other trick with you here. You do all this work, you set up all these things with Particular and all the forms and all the sprites and all the deal and stuff like that. You get the settings perfect. And you want to be able to reuse that. And I know that presets are sometimes like a loaded topic, but when you can do so much with Particular, presets become even more valuable because they save you even more time. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to create a brand new solid from scratch. There's a layer here that says Particular. I'm just going to delete it and I'm going to apply a brand new thing of Particular from scratch so you could just like see it in action. You know that there's like nothing up my sleeve. I'm not cheating. So I have just here just like a standard regular application of Particular here. And just so you could see here, scrubbing it, that's all there is. Show systems, there's nothing going on, just the default little system there. Now, if I go to the designer, we can talk about making presets. So if I click this button here, it will save the entire set of systems. So I'll go ahead and click plus. So I have like 3 systems. If I click this button, I'm going to save all of these systems. But if you just want like one of these systems to be saved as a preset, you can go to the flyout menu for the system, and then you can choose Save System Preset. You have to select it though. Click on it, Save System Preset, and you can save just that one system as a preset. This button saves everything. And when you save a preset, this is where it would show up at the bottom. So let's actually look at how what that looks like to do. So I'm going to go to my main entire 3D scene, and I will launch the designer. And I will pause the designer because there's a lot going on. And what I will do is I will click this button to save multiple presets. I'll call this Chad's Everything. Chad's Everything. My everything. Click OK to save it. And then click Apply. And now if I go back over to my other comp that I was working on with like the empty brand new Particular, go in the designer over here, and I go to my presets, you can see now that we have this custom area, and here is this Chad's Everything we just created. Click on that to apply it. And there we have it. All of these systems that I created before, all this complexity, it all shows up with the single click of a button. All this stuff, the smoke, the fire, the stars, the background, everything shows up. It's just such a time saver. This whole world could be applied with a single preset. Now, I said that was like the last thing, but here's the real last thing, because a lot of this stuff has been done with the thought in mind that I was going to add glow later. Anytime you're doing UI stuff, yeah, you're probably going to add glow at some point because it's being made with light. So I intentionally made these shapes and objects, you know, a little bit darker than they needed to, so that I could come in here and apply optical glow as a final touch. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this amount down to 8. And there we have our final everything with the stars and the Particular and the targets seamlessly looping, and the background wall and the fire and the smoke and the whole deal. So That's it. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. The magic that comes from being able to use Form Particular together at last is great. They've been like a Batman and a Robin that haven't been allowed to fight crime together, but now at last together they work, and it's beautiful. So it's been a pleasure to be able to prepare all this for you and share this with you. So thanks for your time.